So, chapter 4. We did worked on the terms yesterday. Today we're going to go over the notes.
We're not turning in the terms, are we?
No, I just need to see them in just a moment, make sure you don't do them. Those that are online just needs to upload a picture to the category for the grade, and I'll get theirs recorded. Okay, so page 49. We were looking at the laws of supply and demand. We've already kind of gone over some definitions. Now we're going to see how supply and demand in use, okay? And so the last chapter, one of the most important things to understand about economics is the role of factors of production. Okay, so we're going to look at demand. Somebody tell me what demand is.
The amount of goods that is bought at a certain price under certain conditions. In context in this chapter, the relationship between the goods price and the amount that people are willing to pay. Okay,
so the definition in this chapter is more about the relationship between a good's price and the amount that people are willing to buy. Okay, and then as far as supply, somebody read that about supply on page 49.
Supply is the relationship between a good's price and the amount that producers are willing to provide for consumers.
Okay, so it was defined in the previous chapters as a quantity of a good for sale at a certain price under certain conditions. Now we're looking at it as a relationship between a goods price and the amount that producers are willing to provide for consumers. So in supply and demand, if the demand goes up, what else is going up? Okay, supply, but the price is going up. Okay, if the demand goes down, essentially the price goes down. Okay, and then as the supply dwindles, guess what happens there? Price goes up. Okay, because the supply is a little bit more scarce. Now they're going to raise the price. Okay, so the relationship between supply and demand is better understood through explanation regarding value. Goods can have value or worth for different reasons, and classical economists recognized early on that there were two chief types of value: value in use and value in exchange, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so let's talk about value in use. Value in use are value that is directly related to the benefits their owners receive through their use. So when someone purchases something for its value in use, their main purpose is to consume or to keep that good rather than to sell it at a profit. Okay, so value in use. And we'll look at some examples in just a moment. Okay, so value that is directly related to the benefits their owners receive through their use. And you can highlight it in your book, you can write it down. Okay, so value the owners receive through their use. Okay, so when people purchase something for its value and use, their main purpose is to consume or keep that good rather than sell it at a profit someday. Okay, so it's something that you buy that personally means something to you, that you plan on to cherish, to hold on to. And your thinking is, what will it be use of me someday? Can I make use of it? Those are the questions buyers will ask themselves when they are deciding whether to buy a particular good for its value and use. Okay, so some examples. Change markers real quick. So examples would be a ring for someone getting married. Or even a ring that you're giving someone as a romantic gesture. So this would be value and use. You're gonna take the value in consideration. Hey, I'm willing to pay a little more for this because I know this is something I really need and I'm going to use. I don't plan on getting rid of it, plan on keeping it, or plan on using it. Another example in the notes here, and I love this example because it's something simple, but it is something you'll use if you buy it. And that's, they say Mucinex or medicine if for allergies or whatever. So if you go to buy medicine, you're going to use it for that purpose. You're not going to not use it. So it's going to have value to you because you're sick and you need it. And then maybe Sea-Doo for people who live near the lake. Okay, so those are some examples of value and use. So that's a value that is directly related to the benefits their owners receive through their use. And a few examples there. I got that down. Okay. So on page 50 gives an example. And I'm gonna read this example, so just pay attention, you'll get it, the idea here. It's the Dedham farmer and the Boston merchant bargain. Suppose that the year is 1670. A farmer at Dedham, a small town near Boston, Massachusetts, has found time during the winter months to cut a few pine trees and split and plane the wood into boards. The boards are not very valuable to the farmer because he has plenty of standing timber on his farm. But he figures that such boards might be needed in a growing city like Boston. With his wagon, he transports the boards to a dock at Boston Harbor, hoping to exchange them for something of use to him. At the dock, our Dedham farmer meets one of the merchants of Boston who has a small warehouse by the harbor. This merchant imports goods from England and the West Indies and sells them to the settlers of Massachusetts. This merchant has just received a shipment of 50 barrels of molasses from Jamaica. Molasses, a byproduct of sugar refinement, is in great demand in Massachusetts, for it's eaten with cornmeal mush and used in other New England dishes. The merchant was able to buy all this molasses at a reasonable price because of the temporary abundance in Jamaica. But he lacked space to store the 50 barrels, which are still standing on the dock. The merchant needs to enlarge his wooden warehouse. The merchant could use the pine boards to build an addition to his warehouse, and the farmer could use the molasses to sweeten his food. Therefore, the two strike a bargain. They merely swap the goods with no money changing hands, for currency of any sort is scarce in Massachusetts of 1670. Both sellers, who are also buyers, have benefited from this exchange. One barrel of molasses seems to the merchant a modest price to pay for a pile of lumber. After all, he has on hand more molasses than he can store. To the farmer, who does not really need his boards, a whole barrel of molasses is a real prize. Both men believe that they have done well to trade their goods because now they have both found value in use through their exchange. They both obtained goods they really could use. If the farmer had already possessed a barrel of molasses and the merchant had already owned enough boards, they might not have made any exchange on any terms. So you get the idea of the value of use there. Milton Friedman said, if an exchange between two parties is voluntary, it will not take place unless both believe they will benefit from it. Most economic fallacies derive from the neglect of this simple insight, from the tendency to assume that there is a fixed pie that one purity can gain only at the expense of another. A couple of years ago, I was selling a car, and I had somebody want to exchange a motorcycle with me. And I told him, I said, I do not drive motorcycles. And he was right. He said the motorcycle is more valuable than the car. Yeah, but I need the money from the sale of the car. I don't need the motorcycle because I don't ride motorcycles. So that's an example of, him needing the car, but it wasn't going to benefit me, so I'm not going to make the trade because that what he offered was not beneficial. Okay, so kind of think of it in those terms as well. The second type of value is called value in exchange. So in value in exchange, a particular good is worth in exchange for some other good. We could call it value in exchange, trading value of a good. This type of value does not vary according to individual preferences from one buyer or seller to another. So how is this type of value decided? It is determined in the market by what the traffic will bear. A phrase which refers to the amount on which buyers and sellers can both agree in a free market. In the market, sellers of a particular good ask potential buyers, how much will you give me for this? Meanwhile, buyers ask sellers, how much do you want for these goods? Many bargains are struck, and the average that results from such agreements between buyers and sellers is called the value in exchange for that kind of good. And so today, value in exchange is usually expressed in terms of money over the price of goods. So now, what do? Now we exchange money for the price of goods. And by that word price, we mean the amount of money that a buyer pays the seller for a particular item. So going back to the pile of boards and molasses mentioned earlier, each had value in exchange as well as value in use for both the merchant and the farmer. The farmer does not have to consume the barrel of molasses himself. He could sell the molasses to somebody else, perhaps making a profit on the deal. Okay, so I could have said, hey, I'll take your motorcycle and then I will go and sell your motorcycle for more than what I wanted for this car. I just did not do that. Okay, so that's the idea here. Or he may keep it, the lumber, the merchant does not have to use the lumber promptly in construction. He can keep it for months until he's ready for it, or sell it to another customer who may need it more and pay more. Then you have market prices. That's which goods can be sold in open market. So value in exchange varies from one day to the next, depending on the supply of those goods and the current demand for them. Okay, so let's look at value of exchange a moment. Make sure we have the definition and some examples. Okay, so value in exchange. Okay, so what a particular good is worth in exchange for some other good. Okay, so a couple examples. One listed car parts. And name brand items. What do you think they would say name brand items? I mean, but why instead of items that aren't name brand?
Because people buy name brand items.
Because people buy name brand items. Okay, so people will exchange more, they will pay more for name brand items. So it has more of a value in exchange. So for instance, suppose that the Boston merchant and the Dedham farmer took their goods to an open market where they both found buyers who could pay money for the goods. If merchants were paid 20 shillings for each barrel of molasses, the value in exchange of a barrel of molasses that particular day in Boston would have been 20 shillings. If the farmer was able to sell similar pine boards for 15 shillings a load, then the value of an exchange of that quantity of boards would have been 15 shillings. You got that? Okay, so let's look at page 53 and talk about marginal utility and value and diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so the value of goods is placed on a good, that's placed on a good varies from person to person according to individual needs and wants. Okay, so going back to the lumber, if I am building a house, that is going to be more valuable to me than to somebody who is not building a house. Okay. So another important concept to understand is that the value of an object does not remain the same even for an individual. For instance, the Dedham farmer could make good use of 1 barrel of molasses, but he might have been puzzled about what to do with 50. The Boston merchant was happy to obtain enough boards to enlarge his warehouse, but he might have been overwhelmed if he had received a whole shipload of lumber. If a friend were to give you a box of chocolates, you might thank him heartily and consume the whole box in a day or two. But if your friend were to give you 10 more boxes of chocolate the next day, your eagerness to devour the candy would probably diminish. So in short, the more we have of a good, the less value additional units of that thing have for us. And that's known as diminishing marginal utility. And we'll write that on the board in a minute, but states that as one's supply of a specific good or service increases, the satisfaction derived from each additional unit tends to decrease. So when a consumer receives his first unit of a specific good, that first unit may be highly useful. It has a high personal value or utility. However, the more units the consumer acquires, the less value he personally attaches to each succeeding unit. The marginal utility, the amount of satisfaction that results from 1 unit increase of a product, tends to become smaller with each additional unit. So if you already possess 10 pounds of chocolates, you would probably not be much inclined to buy another pound for your personal satisfaction. For you, any additional supply of chocolate has diminishing marginal value. Okay. And then go down to the bottom of 53 and total utility, or the total amount of satisfaction received from possessing a particular amount of a good. There's an example here on page 53. It says, last Friday night, Matt, who is captain of the high school's basketball team, stopped by the Burger Palace after a late night practice and ordered 4 cheeseburgers. The lanky senior was so hungry that he devoured the first burger even before he sat down in the booth. The second and third disappeared almost as quickly. As he finished the fourth, he noticed Mike, a teammate, who came over to discuss an upcoming game. After about 10 minutes, the boys decided to order more food, and Matt brought 2 more cheeseburgers. As the boys got up to leave, the manager who recognized them as being Friday night regulars, offered them a half a dozen extra burgers for a quarter each, since he was about to close. Matt bought 3 and ate 1 in the parking lot on the way to his car as he was driving home, and he slowly ate another one because he hates to waste food. But looking at the 9th and last burger, he decided he simply could not eat anymore, and ended up feeding his appreciative dog. So it illustrates marginal utility that Matt received from each cheeseburger. It also shows total utility, the total amount of satisfaction received from possessing a particular amount of a good. Notice at first, the burger Matt gave the most utility or satisfaction was the first burger. The second burger was almost as valuable. It gave him 19 units of marginal utility, but his total utility jumped to 39. Each additional burger, while increasing his total satisfaction, gave him less additional or marginal utility. And by the time he got to the ninth one, he was too full to take another bite, and it would have given him negative marginal utility, and his total satisfaction would begin to decline. So the principle of diminishing marginal value is useful in explaining why individuals make the choices they do. While Matt was willing to pay the restaurant's asking price for the first 6 cheeseburgers or burgers, he chose not to buy any more, even though his appetite was not completely satisfied. When the price of cheeseburgers dropped to a quarter, he was willing to consume more. But the 9th cheeseburger ended up having no personal value except for a snack of his dog because he couldn't eat it. So before this principle was thoroughly understood, economists often had a difficult time explaining why an individual is sometimes willing to pay a high price for a good, while at other times he is not willing to pay anything for it. So does that make sense? So the more you have a need for something, at that time, you may want that, but then you may have so much of that product that, hey, I don't need that anymore, so that product essentially means nothing to me at that time, okay? And so let's take a couple more notes or more definitions here on this diminishing marginal utility, especially that one, and get some examples. Okay, so diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so that states that as one supply of a specific good or service increases, the satisfaction derived from each additional unit tends to decrease. It should say tends to but you get the idea. Okay, so it's one supply for a specific good or service increases, the satisfaction derived from each additional unit tends to decrease. Okay, so example. Milk, chocolate, donuts. Okay.
So,
Okay, so we don't have but a few minutes, so instead of assigning homework, I'll just put it on the board. We'll do the consider 4.1. We're not going to do all of them, but a couple of them, and 4.2. So I'll put that on the board tomorrow instead of assigning it for homework. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll finish that up tomorrow.
You want to play this game? I thought that's it. I'm gonna shake. Hey, forgot my shake. Shake my hand.